Hi, I'm Erin Power.
And I'm Laura Rupsis.
We're certified health coaches, and this is Health Coach Radio.
This podcast is about the art, science, and business of health coaching.
We share our insider tips to help you become a better coach and entrepreneur.
And we interview expert guests to discover how they've made it in this growing field.
It's time for health coaches to make an impact.
It's time for Health Coach Radio.
Today's guest is Dr. Serena Sterling. Serena holds a doctorate in clinical psychology and is a certified life coach who helps people recover from emotional trauma, anxiety, depression, and chronic pain, assisting them in understanding the connection between what they think and how they feel physically in their bodies. We talked quite a bit about understanding trauma in this episode, but in a light, gettable way that feels appropriate for health coaches. There are some tools and tactics discussed in this conversation that you could easily inject into your conversations with clients to help them uncover some of the root causes of their behaviors. Questions like, what else is going on for you? When did this start for you? What else was happening for you at that time? We love to see who's listening out there, so take a screen grab of your podcast player and tag us on Instagram at Health Coach Radio. And don't forget, the show notes for this episode and all episodes of Health Coach Radio can be found at primalhealthcoach.com/radio. At Health Coach Radio, we are all about raising the voices of practicing health and fitness and nutrition coaches and helping to drive this exploding industry forward. That's why we started the podcast. Our show is proudly brought to you by Primal Health Coach Institute, an approved educational provider with the National Board of Health and Wellness Coaches, which means that our graduates can become eligible to sit for the NBHWC credentialing exam to become a board-certified health and wellness coach. Our fall semester is already off and running, and we're currently enrolling students for our spring 2022 cohort, which starts in early February. At the end of the show, Laura will talk a bit more about our advanced coaching course that will deliver you to coaching mastery and satisfy the educational requirements to sit for that board exam. And you can learn more at primalhealthcoach.com/level2. We do hope you'll enjoy this incredibly enlightening conversation today with our guest, Dr. Serena Sterling.
Hello, Serena. How are you today? Thank you so much for joining us.
I'm fantastic. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh my gosh, we love to dive into all things holistic, certainly nutrition, and what we understand your expertise really lies around kind of thoughts and feelings and how the body expresses itself as a result of that. So this is kind of right in the wheelhouse of health coaches dealing with clients' thoughts and emotions and feelings around their own health and all sorts of other aspects. So I can't wait to dive into this, but would you mind giving our audience a little bit of a backstory about you and sort of how you arrived here?
Sure. So I started out in journalism. I did a master's in international journalism in London, and I then got my dream job at a magazine in New York City called Spirituality and Health. And however, I'll preface this by saying that while I was over in London, I was studying health journalism, and I was focusing on, well, for some reason we were studying mad cow disease at the time, even though that had already been a thing. And then while I was over there, foot and mouth disease came out, and I got really disgusted by the food, which, the French are known for food, but the British are not. And so I ended up just being like, I'm not going to eat the protein. I'm not going to eat the animal protein over here. So I ended up mainly eating a lot of carbs, but bad carbs, like pretzels and bread but soup. But then I was like in my early 20s. So I'd go out and drink also. And surprise, surprise, I got tired. But I also was kind of disillusioned by journalism. I knew that there was something more I wanted to do, and I didn't know what it was, but I just kept plugging along. And then I moved to New York City, and 3 weeks into my professional honeymoon, 9/11 happened, and the magazine I worked for was about 3 blocks away. So that was a rather big trauma, and I didn't know how to process it. So I just didn't. I didn't process anything. And that that exacerbated the fatigue I already had. But even before that happened, I remember going to there used to be this huge underground mall at the World Trade Center, and I would just walk around, I'd get my lunch, I'd come back to my office, and then I'd just kind of like slump in my chair and take a little power nap. And then after 9/11, it got exacerbated. But long story short is that my medical doctor diagnosed me with chronic fatigue syndrome. And then he told me that there was no cure and just to learn to cope with it. And that was just not an acceptable answer to me because I was really driven. I still am. And I had all these goals. And so I found a holistic doctor, a chiropractor, who had all this training in orthomolecular nutrition and homeopathy. And she did this one technique that I had already been introduced to in undergrad in Portland called Neuroemotional technique. And I did that with her for a few weeks and I got a lot better. And she was able to find the emotions getting stuck in my body that I just wasn't even conscious of and wasn't expressing. But then she also put me on a very strict diet. We didn't have paleo diet back then. This was 2001. We didn't have any of them really. It was more of like an anti-candida. Like I looked at it and I cried.
You're like, that's everything I eat.
It's like, what am I supposed to eat? This is like, but I was desperate for help. So I did it. And I'm not kidding. In 3 weeks, I was like 110% better. And so I stuck with her. And then I was like, like I would go to see her twice a week. And I just kept getting better and better. And I felt so much better than I like even before grad school in journalism. So, but my interest was in the mind body. Like, how could my emotions or the things that I wasn't expressing cause illness in my body? And how could like the reverse be true? How could expressing that allow me to feel so much better? So, I decided to put the journalism aside and study psychology so I could learn one of those techniques. If I had had more confidence, I'd say, in my ability to understand like chemistry, I think I would have gone into nutrition. But that was a real turnoff for me. However, like I was stuck with like just doing my own research on like and following what she says. So I've done my own research on like what's the best eating, like also back in 2001, that's when you could eat 15 SnackWells, but it was only 100 calories.
Zero fat.
And it was like,
Oh
but
my
you can really taste the chemicals, but you're like, oh, nom, 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 this is fine.
I used to love that Entenmann's fat-free coffee cake. That was another big one for me.
Yeah, everything was like fat-free but loaded with like just terrible ingredients. But everything was like convenient. And it was like my first real job after grad school where you're just like, I don't have time to cook. I'll just eat crap. And then, oh, surprise, surprise, I felt like crap. So.
Wow. So interesting. I'm so much that I want to dive into with this because, being 3 blocks from 9/11 and you described that as a rather big trauma, which
understatement.
I can't even imagine. I can't even wrap my head around it remotely. What you said was, I didn't know how to process it, so I just didn't. I feel like I want to dive into that statement a little bit. Maybe that's a huge statement to start a podcast interview with, but it's such an interesting statement because, thinking about 9/11 specifically, let's just use that one as the example. How many tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people are walking around with the trauma of that, having been so close to it? So can you speak to what that means? Can you maybe define that? What does it mean to process trauma?
Right. So I fortunately was spared seeing a lot of things that I had friends see, but I saw the second tower collapse. I like when I came out of the subway at Wall Street Station, it was a complete whiteout. And I think I had already gone into shock in the train for some reason. It was stopped and no one was on the platform and stuff like that. But so there was stuff that I saw that I couldn't. I think that trauma puts you into a state of a place of being in a very primitive way. You don't have words for it. You can't necessarily make sense of it. And so I think because it was so overwhelming, I was like, that was overwhelming. I don't know what's going on in the world. And I tried to cry that night, but I couldn't. And I talked to my parents, and I come from a family that was very like, feelings weren't really encouraged. And we never really talked about like, how are you feeling? It's more of like, what are you doing? How are you doing in school? And so when I talked to my parents, it was like, what did you see? You were so close to the scene. Like, what was going on? They weren't like, oh, we're so glad you're okay. So it just kind of like reconfirmed that like, I don't need to process. It's just, and I think that a lot of people, I think we were just taking in so much information at the time, like we were trying to understand what happened, that, and I wish also, I know I'm going in like a few different conversations at once, but I wish that in school, we would have mandatory classes, just we have like algebra that I've never used since 8th grade, but like that we were taught how to identify our feelings, access them, and express them.
Yeah.
But especially in my family, where it's like an overachieving family to do well, I didn't learn that. And so, or even when I was like not doing well in college or something, or I was upset, there was so much stigma. And I still think there is stigma attached to like going to see a psychologist or a therapist to get help with your emotions. But if you have like a knee problem, no one makes fun of you, or no one like looks upon you in a different way if you're like, I'm going to go see the chiropractor, or and so I think that because of all that, I just kind of like held things in almost like on an unconscious level, because it didn't seem, I didn't know how. I just didn't know how to talk to anyone about it. I mean, I had a friend staying with me at the time in New York, but we didn't really talk about like, what was that like to see and experience that.
Yeah, I think one thing that you touched on in explaining that, and by the way, thank you for bringing us right back to that moment, and I'm sure that's hard for you, but you mentioned trauma puts you into a primitive sort of part of the brain, and it's almost like this logical lobe of the brain, and there's no neurophysiology, I'm just making stuff up, but like this logical lobe of the brain that's like, okay, this really terrible thing happened, I need to dot my I's and cross my T's and just, kind of think through it. And it's sort of the sympathetic nervous system state is on, and we never really resolve into softening into how it feels and into the parasympathetic nervous state. I definitely agree with you that upbringing, we're taught in our upbringing to kind of hold feelings in certain ways. So that makes a lot of sense. I thought that was a really good explanation. That idea of a primitive brain, that absolute fight or flight, mechanism in the brain, the self-protective, self-preservation piece. I think the part that's missing is that we never then resolve into softening into parasympathetic state or feelings, by the sounds of it.
Yeah, no, I love the way that you describe that, because it's so true. And I think that like, I can remember almost everything that happened, but I think that like, if you go through an even bigger trauma, like if you think about the, not to get really heavy, but there is like a woman that was brutally raped in that park. What's that park in New York City? Totally like
Central Park.
Yes. And she can't remember that. And it's good. She can't remember that but she survived it. And so the brain, I think it's a self-preservation. Like you don't want to remember things like that, or like, I don't think it would have been helpful to actually be going through what I went through during 9/11 and being like, oh, I feel terrified, I feel sad, I feel, until like you have time afterwards to process it. And it may take a little bit longer. And I think that and I even went to see a psychologist, it wasn't, like I talk about this in this book that I wrote recently, and it's just like, every time she was like, well, what was that like for you? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't have words for it.
Yeah.
Whereas like the other doctor was just like, we're going to ask your body how that felt. And so it's kind of like, once you have a little bit of distance, and once you have more time to kind of like percolate and filter those emotions, then you can express them. But it makes sense that on some level, it does get shoved to the back burner, because you have to keep moving through life and feeding yourself and showering. And if you're just completely overwhelmed by all these emotions, I don't think you'd be able to function very well.
No, agreed. I mean, Erin and I have interviewed a couple of people that really speak to what it really, when we are forced with these emotions or faced with these emotions, what it is we're really trying to avoid is really the physical feelings that these emotions elicit, and perhaps it is just subconscious, the brain's desire to avoid that because it wants to avoid what the physical feeling is that this emotion elicits. So I would love, do you mind sharing with us a little bit about how you kind of worked through that trauma? I mean, clearly this was at a later date. I would love to hear how you did, because interestingly, the firm that my dad worked for a number of years, two firms, he was in finance, and he spent, I don't know, 20 some years at a firm called Kiefer Wet and Woods. They were in the first tower, and then he was with another firm that was in the other tower. He happened to not be in New York at the time when the towers fell, but he was like the one office where people could call. I can't even imagine what it was like for him to know that all of his colleagues, not even just the firm he was with, but the firm that he spent 20 some odd years with, gone in a heartbeat, and everybody calling, phones ringing off the hook, nobody there to help, and just the trauma. And again, he comes from a family too, where you just don't talk about this kind of stuff. It all kind of gets shoved under the rug. And, his way, I think, of dealing with it ultimately was to run away. He went and lived in Italy for 3 months by himself and learned to speak Italian. I'm Italian. He is 100% Italian. And I think through that journey of spending time within himself and pursuing something he's always wanted to pursue and kind of letting all that go, I think led him down a journey or a path. I don't know if he's ever really been over it, but I think that helped him in some way, just giving him time and space to process. God, life is so short. I think it really hit him there at that point. Like, it could have all been gone had I been in New York. And there's so much that he put off or that he was putting up with, that why bother, all these things that kind of led to him finally learning to retire and pursue things he's always wanted to learn, like guitar and Italian and all that other stuff. Like, that was his way. Again, I don't know if he's fully through this, but I would love to hear a little bit of your journey and how you learned to process it. And then maybe by default now, how you help clients do the same thing.
Well, I love that he took some time away. As within a few days, I left New York and I went to see my family in Philadelphia, and it helped to get away from the city. I went to visit a friend in Dallas, I think it was. I went to go visit a friend over New Year's. I went to visit her in Denmark. I just did all this, like, I'm just going to get away from the city. That was one way. And I think that I probably wouldn't have processed it had it not been for the fact that my body was shutting down. And so that's what, so also, like, people repress emotions for all sorts of reasons, but the number one reason I see is that something is too overwhelming. And so all of those emotions I felt but didn't actually express or wasn't even conscious of, I do feel like I repressed them. And I was like, no, I just started this new job. I need to, like, focus on this. Like, I'm in New York City. I need to, like, explore the city, like all these justifications for not actually processing anything, until I couldn't take it anymore, because I was just, the fatigue was getting debilitating. Like, I had to work from home for 5 months because our office wasn't necessarily damaged, but all the ash came through the vents. So it had to be cleaned, and it took like 5 months. But then that was awful because my couch was like right there and I could just take a nap whenever I wanted. So I found this doctor based on the fact that she did this technique called Neuroemotional technique that I had been introduced to by a chiropractor in Portland when I was an undergrad. And she basically she asked a lot of questions and she listened. She did way more than my medical doctor, who's just like, well, how much do you normally sleep? And this is a lot. Okay, well, we're going to take some tests. Like, that was it. Whereas she was like, well, where do you work? What were you doing on 9/11? Where were you? Like, but then she would ask my body. She would just be like, okay, I just want you to, like, sink in and think about the fatigue. And then she would do this applied kinesiology or muscle testing to access, like, what is the body trying to say? because the body never lies, but we can lie all the time and pretend like things don't happen and things don't matter. And then it uses principles from Chinese medicine also, where different organs correspond to different emotions. And so she was able to pinpoint with huge amount of precision, figure out what emotion my body was feeling that I wasn't conscious of. So it would be kind of like powerlessness, helplessness, impending doom, like something bad's going to happen. And she was able to lift that. And then she was also able to, this is part of the technique also, where you can take it back to an earlier time in your life where you felt similar. And it wasn't necessarily a huge trauma, like watching, your city get terrorized, but it was more of like, I remember going back to when I was the beginning of ninth grade, and my best friend was like, I don't want to be friends with you anymore. And turned all my friends against me. And I was basically powerless and helpless. And I was worried of like someone else doing this to me. And so by pinpointing that and lifting up that emotion, looking at it, talking about it, then the stuff in the present wasn't bothering me so much. So we do things like that, or be like, I'm okay living in New York City. I'm okay going back to work, and finding the emotions underneath that rather than just doing a talk it out approach.
Wow. Do you know how, I don't know if this is a crazy question, but how do emotions get into the body? Okay, I'll try to explain this question better, because I think it was kind of weird. But so we have an experience that triggers emotions in the body, in our mind, but then also into our body. Like, how does that work? Like, how do we get emotions into our body? I mean, I guess it goes back to kind of, Laura, what you were saying earlier. We've spoken to lots of professionals who say the feeling in the body of the emotion is the overwhelming piece that we try to avoid. But it was almost like this doctor that you saw was on a seek and destroy mission to find the emotions in your body. How did they get in there?
It's a really good question. And I don't know that I have the answers for them, but I can tell you that we feel emotions in our body first, and then our mind makes sense of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think like we're as humans, we're just trying to always make meaning out of things. And so the emotion she was able to find, she's using like a chart, but it like the chart, all the emotions on the chart have been tested, like empirically validated tests to make sure that like they correspond with what someone's feeling. But even some of the emotions, like I would have to look up and be like, okay, paralyzed will, what does that even mean? But it's, I don't know, this is getting kind of complicated, I guess. But how do emotions get into the body is that I think that it has to do with the situation that you're in. From the techniques that I use with people, and like the conceptualization I'm able to do for my training in psychology. Like I was just thinking of a client I had recently, and can't remember the exact emotions. Well, she basically feels taken advantage of by this woman who she offered to like help out financially. And then this woman has just like taken advantage of that for the past like 3 years. And so there are certain emotions that would go along with that. And that wasn't even like the issue we were working on was pain in her neck.
Yeah.
So this woman has literally become a pain in her neck.
But coincidentally, that's where people tend to carry stress, right? Feelings of stress in their neck. I mean, that makes complete sense to me. And I wonder how much of this is driven by the hormonal response to emotion that manifests itself somewhere in the body. I mean, I wrote down what you said because it's so true. You wrote that the body never lies. We can lie to ourselves all day long, but at the end of the day, your body's not going to lie to you. It's going to express this somehow, some way. And I find this to be true across just about everything, in the food that we're eating, in the type of exercise that we're doing, sleep, stress, certainly the trauma and emotions that, look, we're all going to feel them. I mean, this is life. shit happens, right? And we're going to have an emotional response to it, whether it be joy, whether it be, what's the opposite of joy? I don't know, sadness, fear.
Joy, pain, sunshine, rain.
Yes, there you go. So, but to your point, kind of what might evoke this emotion, the situation you're in, I think oftentimes will determine the severity, right? How much it might impact us, our ability given the situation to express it. I bet with this woman, this client that you're working with, this woman, there's probably a lot of angst around having a conversation with this woman and feeling comfortable expressing how she feels to her, versus if the situation involved were with somebody else she feels more comfortable discussing this with, might be a totally different situation, right? And so feeling bottled up, I mean, I can totally get how what you're saying, it's got to be a little bit different for everybody based on the actual circumstance. So you were talking about, so it's called neuroemotional technique, right? Is this something that you practice then with your clients, or do you call what you do something different?
No, this is something that this is like the one technique that's really stuck, but I've also learned a lot of other ones, and some have just been like, well, that was interesting to learn, but I'm not going to implement it. But others, I've taken a little bit of here, a little bit of there. And so now I just do like a kind of potpourri of like the techniques I use. Everyone, when they go through this training, I feel like everyone starts to use it in a different way. I mean, if you were to go see a chiropractor who does this, it would be different from the way I do it because of my training in psychology versus like an acupuncturist. You have to have a higher degree in one of the healing arts, which is why I then went to choose psychology. But it's an amazing technique that allows you to find what is underneath this, because just doing the talk therapy that I was trained to do, I wouldn't get the same results.
Mm-hmm. So what are they looking for when they come to you? Are they coming to you, like your big trigger was this chronic fatigue syndrome? You had a physical condition. Is that who's coming to you? People who are struggling with maybe chronic mystery illness, or do they know they have unprocessed trauma, or who are these folks?
For the most part, they are people who have chronic pain that hasn't been alleviated by allopathic medicine. They have some sort of like what it's called a medically unexplained symptom, where you go to the doctor, all the tests come back negative, but you still feel like crap. And the doctor is like, well, maybe it's all in your head. Maybe you should go see a psychologist. Maybe, and they're like, great. Now what do I do? So unhelpful. For doctors to say that, but I also help people with anxiety and depression, relationship issues and stuff like that. But I find that a lot of people do have more of a physical issue.
Yeah. Interesting. The chronic pain thing is interesting. My mom struggled with chronic pain for the last probably 20 years of her life, and went down some dark pharmaceutical roads to try to manage it, and nothing worked. Like it was a brick wall she was beating her head against for decades. And it's like, why is nothing working? How is it possible that nothing's working? And the doctors literally, after prescribing her many different contraindicated opioids and narcotics and kind of ruining her that way, were like, I don't know. And that was honestly the end of the line for her. And I'm not here to disparage doctors. I would never do that. But, I get a little grouchy when I think about how my mom wasn't taken care of, I guess. Mm-hmm. So in the realm of chronic pain, I don't know, walk us through that a little bit. What can that be? How does that work?
Well, it's true. I mean, like you could take all the different pain medications that are out there. You could even have a back surgery. And I was floored when I realized that there's something called failed back surgery. I was like, how is that possible? But it is, it's there. It's because, in my opinion, like the underlying root cause of the pain has to do with something emotional, and your body is not betraying you when it's giving you this pain. It's trying to communicate with you that like, hey, like if we figure out what the root cause is, the pain will go away. But it's there to alert you to something that needs to be processed. And taking a lot of medications may feel good in the short term, but it's masking that pain. And so your mom, could have taken all these medications and still felt like crap because it's not getting to And the thing is, you can even like some of this work, I found that you can get the pain to go away if you have this like aha moment reading a book or something. But if you don't figure out like the very root cause of it, it's going to come back. It's called symptom imperative, and it comes back in a different part of your body until you figure it out.
Wow. Interesting. Yeah. Her pain was back pain specifically. And so when you mentioned failed back surgery, that's even a category in the back surgery realm, it's interesting because she went for surgeries and they didn't work either. And it's like something has to work. It has to move the dial in some way. But everything you're saying is like, honestly, it goes back to root cause. And it can be a little bit of a leap for us, in our logical brains to imagine that the root cause of chronic back pain could be emotions, trapped trauma. But I will say my mom never explored that avenue. So it was the one unturned leaf.
Well, so one thing that I do that I try to help my clients with over the course of the treatment plan I put people on is that I help them try to figure out, like, connect the dots of like, when did your symptoms start? Did you fall? Did you have an accident? Or if that didn't happen, then what was going on in your life? Because it's odd to just get pain out of the blue. And it happens gradually, and you're like, oh, well, maybe I need to stretch more. Maybe, maybe I just like worked too hard at the gym, and then it's like there and it doesn't go away. But if you start to piece apart, like, and look at what was going on in my life, like, oh, like, met with this woman yesterday and she was like, well, my sister was getting married to a guy I didn't like, and I was in a relationship that wasn't going well. Like, okay, well, there's got to be some stuff there, because otherwise, so you can always find, if you look hard enough, and you sometimes bring out your calendar and you're like, what was going on in my life like 3 years ago in July? And so I would say that that's a good starting point for anyone, is just to be like, okay, like I'll use an example from my own life. Like I developed a pain in my neck a few years ago, and I knew exactly who it was involved. And there was this sports coach. I was like focusing on working with athletes at the time, and he was this sports coach who had like all these connections to these baseball players, but he wanted me to work with him for free, and then he would connect me to the baseball players, but he kept asking more and more things, and he kept like calling me at inappropriate hours and like just getting all these things. And once I was putting down my boundaries, he got really snippy. And then when I was like, okay, here's the contract, let's sign the contract, you need to do these things. And he turned around and he tried to like gaslight me and shame me and all these things. And he was like, he was like a 45-year-old man-child who was just kind of like being very immature, I felt. But because I put down my boundaries and he acted out, I developed a pain in my neck because of my history of having family members who gaslight, who try to get their way. And so the root can go very far down. And then unless you figure out, like the woman I mentioned before, who has the friend who's taking advantage of her, like it's going to be a hard conversation for her, because she's the type of person, like a lot of women in particular, who we put everyone else before ourselves. And so it's hard to be like, excuse me, but I think you need to go now. Like, I think
exactly
enough. It's just hard when we're used to giving and giving and giving. So I don't think that's just one example in her life. I bet that there are probably multiple examples of when she gave a lot and people took, and then she finally had the courage to stand up, and then someone got upset.
Yeah. Erin and I both work predominantly with women. So I think we can both agree with you there. We see this as a pattern all the time. I know it's a pattern I have myself. But I just kind of drawing this back to kind of what health coaches can kind of draw out of this. And in our school, we teach a lot of the psychology and the psychological theory that underpins coaching and coaching conversations. And one of the big questions we'll often ask is, when has this pattern held true for you in your past? to help the client kind of uncover, not only being able to identify, okay, so this is something that I do, but also help you draw conclusions about what might have made it better or what you could have done, and use that experience to help you handle the situation that you're in now. So there's a tremendous amount of psychology in the coaching practice and the coaching relationship, but we're not psychologists and we're not therapists. And it's important, I think, as health coaches to use these tools at our disposal, but in a collaborative fashion, and helping that client kind of come to terms with in their own mind what they think is really going on here. And it's our job as coaches to ask the questions and to listen and to create space for people. So, I don't know if this is really a fair question, but can you maybe identify some tools along this line that coaches can use with their clients, particularly as it relates to health? I heard you mention food as one area, something that you might come across in your practice that health coaches will see also. So food or exercise or other aspects of the lifestyle. I'd love your opinion there.
Well, first of all, I'm so glad that you do what you do, because just helping people make those connections, I mean, it seems clear for a lot of people, but it's not. It's kind of like the same as like, how much sleep are you getting? Let's go back to the basics. Like, I know that I am a huge night owl. I've been working on this for years, trying to like flip it so that I go to sleep early and wake up early. And it's just, I don't know what it is, but I just love, like, there's this, like, all of a sudden there's me time at 9 p.m. and then I don't want to go to bed.
Very common. We see that a lot as well, right, Erin?
So some tools would just be to like ask yourself what kind of self-care you're doing. Like, how are you eating in terms of like how much are coming from whole foods? I mean, this is way more your realm than mine, but to just keep asking about that, because it's so easy to be like, oh, well, like if you have to do a food diary, that gets so embarrassing.
Yeah.
And you try to cheat on it. You're like, well, that wasn't, but then you realize how much sugar you're actually ingesting. And it's like, okay, I need to pull back and really look at this. And so, I think journaling is a really good tool that, like, for some reason, not everyone does it. But I think if you can find like an online journal for free, and then you're already on your computer most of the time. So then you just put in like, okay, just do 5 minutes. And there's some journal prompts, I would say, that are really helpful. Like, what made my day really good today? What was something that I could have done differently to make my day good? And what am I most grateful for? Things like that. Or those are just prompts, but you could also, there's at the end of the day, like when you're done with your work, or like before you decide to like relax for the evening, you could also do kind of like a mind dump of like, what's something that I've been thinking about a lot that I can't stop thinking about, like the hamster wheel loop you can't get out of, and just dump it into your journal. And that's so helpful. And I recommend this even with people with chronic pain, because for a lot of people, we don't have that outlet. We don't have, even if we have like a spouse or a partner, we don't tend to talk about the things that are like running through our minds. And even if we do, like, it doesn't stop the thoughts from happening. So putting them somewhere outside of your mind is really helpful.
Yeah.
You know what I love about those journal prompts, and this is something that I know Erin dives deep into in our level 2 courses, they're all positive prompts. One of the things we focus on in coaching is to try to avoid questions that are going to elicit a negative thought pattern or a negative response. And the ways that you can sort of reframe or ask a question that's going to, so something like, what made my day really good today? The next one, and instead of what could I have, what went wrong, the positive thing is, gosh, what could I have done to make it even better, right? Some sort of like a positive spin on what didn't go well, right? It's from a positive point of view,
Approach
those kinds of
avoidance
things.
is the way we talk about it in coaching, is the approach goals versus avoidance goals. Like,
Mhm.
Here's what I don't want to do tomorrow. Here's what I didn't like about today. We don't even acknowledge that. That is a very good approach. And one thing I was thinking you shared actually a few minutes ago, Serena, is here's the deal, like kind of where Laura and I are coming from is like, how can a health coach help nurture a client who's struggling with some kind of super deep root cause that truly is potentially out of scope of practice for us, where we can then have that collaborative relationship like Laura mentioned, and we can refer out. But here's the deal, it's well within our scope of practice to say, what else is going on for you?
Yep.
Like, we don't just have to talk about food and fitness and sleep and stress. Like, what else is going on? And the client at first might not know what we're getting at. It's like, tell me everything that's going on in your life right now. Or I really loved your calendar example. Like, how long has this been a problem for you? What else was going on in your life at that time? And if the client shares something that, if they feel comfortable sharing something that happened, a thing that happened, it's okay for us to say, have you ever done any work to process that grief or trauma? And they'll say yes or no. Would you be open to exploring that with a licensed psychologist? And that's how we can nurture our clients along this path without feeling like we're stepping out of our lane. I think there's some great tools there.
So just to give I am not a licensed psychologist. I have a doctorate in clinical psychology, and then I chose not to get licensed, even though I went through postdoc and all that extra training, because I started to go more into coaching because of this idea of like, I don't want to sit with someone and be like, wow, let's look at your family and how you feel messed up from your family. Like, and how, let's look at all your problems and like diagnose the problems. And because in that, I mean, you can get a huge amount of benefit from therapy, but you often feel like crap and hate your family also.
Right.
So
Oh my gosh, yeah.
I really wanted to look at the positive and like really help people feel good in their lives. And so also being under the umbrella of a coach, I can work with people from all over the world remotely rather than be stuck to like restricted to my one state wherever I am.
That's a great point. Couple points is I totally hear what you're saying as far as therapy, because my mom went through a very traumatic event with her family, and I don't know the doctor she went to go see, the therapist. She told me she sought therapy, but I will tell you, she has not felt positive, like at all. She hates her family, won't go near them now, and that she's a victim. And this is what she's come up with after all this therapy by a licensed psychologist. So I don't think it's the licensed psychologist part that's the problem. It's probably the actual doctor she saw. But I noticed that about her. Whereas, what we do in the health coaching realm is, again, focusing on that serves us nothing. It doesn't give us anything that empowers us to move forward by any stretch of the imagination, because my mom keeps telling the same story over and over and over again. But interestingly enough, you have a doctorate in psychology. So it's not as though you don't have the education and the skill set to do this. The difference is you're not state licensed, so you can move around. You're not going to call yourself a licensed psychologist. You would probably need that license if you wanted to go work in that clinical capacity at a hospital or a clinic or something like that. But for someone who wants to just work independently in a private practice, you can structure what you do with people as you have done and do a lot of good without the licensure. Do I have that right? I mean, what have you found to be the benefits of the path you chose versus?
Well, it wasn't what I thought I was going to do. Some things happened that showed me like this would be a better path.
Mm-hmm.
And I am grateful, and I do appreciate my training in psychology, because even like the other day I was working with someone, and it turned out that like for 43 years, he was holding on to this belief that like a friend of his told him when he was young that like, oh, everyone likes you for the first 5 minutes.
Oh boy.
But then he's like, oh my gosh, but people don't like me. Like, I'm going to have to be guarded and just keep to myself. And then by doing the mind body stuff that I do, I was able to find that actually it wasn't, it was this kid, like, I mean, they were like 18, and so this friend of his was actually projecting onto him what he felt about himself.
Mhm.
And so my training in psychology is helpful to know what exactly projection is and how like those emotions get displaced onto someone else to feel better, and then how it shows up. And so I feel like I use my training and education and understanding of like working with like thousands of clients in that therapeutic way to then conceptualize and make sense of what someone's going through, in my practice, but then to really also, and then the mind body stuff then also looks at like, okay, so a therapist may be like, okay, yes, it's your mother. Like your mother is the issue. But if I'm asking the body for answers, I can be like testing and being like, nope, it's not your mother. Like what else is like, who else is in your life that may be bothering you? And then test and find out versus like keep hammering on this one topic that the client thinks it is because that makes them feel safe or whatever, and they get to be right about it. But then there are all these other issues that develop because you think you're like on the right path, but you're not. And so I just really, I loved when I went to a coaching course for the first time and we were like, it was fun. And it was like, let's look at how like your resiliency and like what you do want to bring into your life versus like everything that's going wrong in your life. Like, how is that will eventually get you to feeling better? But why sit in it for so long versus just be like, wow, like I do have these tools. Like I am really, a good person, and versus, like you were saying, like your mom is in that victim place of like, oh, poor me. Like my family was crappy, so therefore I'm gonna have a crappy life. Well, not necessarily.
And I just love, because I'm hearing this. And my role at our school is as admissions director. And I talk to people a lot who are people that went to medical school who suddenly realized that's not what I want to do. I don't want to manage symptoms, right? Or that the education I received, while I found value in it, I don't fundamentally really believe that that's the right nutritional approach for most people. Thus, maybe I don't want to go that direction. Or even from the psychological place, to your point, they have their psychiatrists, psychologists, perhaps they're licensed, unlicensed, but they've also realized the value of that coaching dynamic and they want to learn that. So there's so much value in the education and the experience you have that you bring to the table. Erin and I talk about this all the time. I don't care before I got on here, I was talking to a truck driver. Okay. It's amazing to me how many truck drivers I talk to that have realized what an unhealthy lifestyle driving a truck is. They have figured out the secret sauce to them being a healthier truck driver, a healthier person, and they want to help other truck drivers. Guess what? They're an expert in this and they can help a lot of people. So there's a tremendous amount of value in your own life experience and the own education you've had so far that you can then take to fit this, like, this is what I do. And this is the person that it helps, and this is how it works. And I can hear sort of the passion and conviction in your voice on how what you're doing now relative to what you initially trained for has really just fed your soul, right? I found this is the right place. So I congratulate you on that. I think it's fantastic.
Well, thank you. And I think that, the more that you find people that have that personal experience, the better those coaches or therapists or practitioners are going to be, because I found that like and I wish that more people would also explain like, this is why I do what I do because of what I went through. Because I went to a doctor or another therapist or whoever, and they were just like, oh, I learned all this from studying it. I just wouldn't be the same.
As you're talking about your how you're combining what you've learned in your training and applying this coach technique, the other thing I was thinking is that we can't discredit the expertise that our clients bring. Mm-hmm. So clients come to the relationship with the expertise of their own lived experience, and sometimes straight up clinical approaches don't even factor that in. There's a real student teacher paradigm where I'm the boss and you're the subordinate in this relationship, and the coaching model really brings us together as equals, which is a really productive relationship. So I think the way you're putting it together makes a lot of sense.
Well, thank you so much for saying that. There's like one of the first coaching programs I did outside of San Francisco was like co-active coaching, where it was like the client knows just as much as you do. They just need a little extra guidance. And one thing I hated when I was studying to be a psychologist, and even when I went through my own therapy, was like that feeling of, okay, the psychologist has all this training and clinical experience, and I'm just sitting here in isolation by myself. And it's like this very kind of like doctor is over there and client patient is over here. And I never, ever wanted to come off like that. And also, even as like, when people are like, oh, you're a healer. And I'm like, no, I'm not. Like, I am a conduit to help the client. Like, I've learned all these things, but like, and I've had to do my own work on this. Like, when a client doesn't get better, I can't say like, that's my fault. It's like, it takes a collaboration. And I'm also not the person who's like, I get amazing results with some clients, but also it's like, I'm just opening up and finding the blocks that, and then they walk through it. Like they know themselves way better than I do. I just am like using these different tools I've used to help them figure that out.
Oh my gosh, that's so true. We talk about all the time about at the end of the day, each client is an expert in their own body, in their own experience. And I think for many of us, we've just sort of stopped listening. We're so used to just, I don't know, I guess by rote. We were having a conversation earlier about how in my old career, I'd be driving home at the end of the day and I literally would not remember how I got home. It was just on subconscious autopilot. I do not remember how I got home. Like I stopped paying attention to that period of time in my day. And I think this is, and I know it holds true because I work with clients all the time. I know Erin does too. I'm sure you do too. There's so much people have just sort of put on autopilot that we just stopped listening to. There's so much in the background too that we've learned to accept as normal. That's not normal. Chronic pain being one of them. Until it hits a level that you just like, this is not normal. I know a lot of people that this is an example for. So from the standpoint of, I don't know, I guess just, I would love some tools from you, if you don't mind, maybe a couple of tips or tools that coaches can use to help elicit that kind of feeling in their clients, that they really are the expert here. Are there certain questions that you use, certain techniques that you use where the client starts to have some confidence in their own ability to kind of identify the direction they want to go, what's going on? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, a client that I just met a week ago, I think she came to mind because she was saying like, oh, I wish I could like speak up more. I wish I could stand my ground. And when she was going over different stories in her life, I was like, well, this is a prime example of you doing just that. I don't think you're giving yourself enough credit. Like she's talking about some, gorgeous guy that she could have married and had this beautiful life on a farm with like the most exquisite house you could ever think of. But she was like, the sex was ho hum and there was no real passion. And I was like, a lot of women would have chosen that trophy lifestyle over like passion and desire, but you decided that that's what you wanted. So that's an example of you doing exactly what you say you want to do. So I would say that like just to help a client see their the things that they may not see in themselves. And I think I'm guilty of this. We're all probably guilty of this, of like not seeing how amazing we are, because I don't know, society or something has told us like we need to do more, be more, have more, when in fact like we're these amazing people. So I just think that like just being each other's cheerleader, pointing out when you see it, even if you're just like, wow, like you look amazing today. I love your makeup. I love what you're wearing. Like just little, because we don't compliment each other very much at all. Right. And it feels great.
Yeah. It's funny. I've used that technique. I'm sure Erin has too, of the, this is an example of, and drawing out kind of what they did. But a lot of times I'll get but that was different because, that somehow, because the situation was different, or there, to your exact point, we just don't give ourselves enough credit. And I think you're right too, to a certain degree. We don't support each other as humans very well.
I think it's about receiving also. And I'm working on this myself. I'm not the best at receiving. I'm much better at giving. And so if we unravel that and look at why we're not good at receiving, why we're like, if someone were to be like, wow, you look gorgeous today. And you're like, oh no, I'm just, I probably had a good night's sleep, like, why can't you just take that and just be like, wow, thank you. Yeah, I did put an effort today.
Acknowledge it. I love it. So this, I don't know, I've just gotten a lot out of having this conversation with you. And I know you were saying that you had something that you wanted to be able to share with our listeners, where I think some of them can then kind of ferret out exactly what it is you do and the techniques that you use and gain some benefit for themselves and learn from you. So would you mind sharing that with us?
Yes. So for your first 3 viewer listeners who are interested, I'm offering a complimentary intake and reported findings sessions. So that involves me going through any sort of whatever issue you want to feel better about. Then I would use the way I do my stuff, like these mind body stress reduction techniques. We'll do that in the first session. And then afterwards, in another session, a shorter one, I'll go over what I found and the ways that we could work together. And so it's a value of $275. And so for your first 3 listeners who are interested, you can go to my website. It's drserenasterling.com. So it's drserenasterling.com. And then you can fill out the application. And it's probably like a 10-minute application. And one of the questions is, how did you hear about me? And make sure you mention the podcast, and then you'll get the complimentary session.
Nice.
I'm excited. Look, I think we talked to our coaches about how important it is to also be willing to be coached, right? And a willingness to seek outside. I mean, some of the best coaches I know, Aaron, myself, and Mark Sisson, and you, we all kind of seek help from other people that might just be a few steps ahead of us in our journey, or help us kind of see our own blind spots that might get in the way. So I would encourage, what a great offer, so first 3, yeah. After that, you're kind of SOL, but give it a shot. I mean, do they just need to mention the podcast, or is there any kind of code or anything they need, or it's just mentioning the podcast?
Just mention the podcast. And even if you're not, even if like, you're like, oh, I listened to this a week late, and like, still get in touch and let me know.
Nice. That's amazing. Thank you so much. This is really interesting, insightful conversation.
Mm-hmm.
We love talking about the whole body, the whole mind. We have to, as health coaches, we have to at least appreciate it. And so this is a really important conversation for us. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. This has been fun.
It has. Thank you so much, Serena.
Thank you.
This podcast was brought to you by Primal Health Coach Institute. To learn more about how to become a successful health coach, get in touch with us by visiting primalhealthcoach.com/call. Or if you're already a successful health coach, practitioner, influencer, or thought leader with a thriving business and an interesting story, we'd love to hear from you. Connect with us at hello@primalhealthcoach.com and let us know why we need to interview you for Health Coach Radio. Thanks for listening.
Well, if you've been listening at Health Coach Radio, you'll know that we're all about raising the voices of practicing health, fitness, and nutrition coaches, but most importantly, helping to further legitimize this exploding industry. Aaron and I have disclosed often that we're on the faculty of the Primal Health Coach Institute, founded by none other than the health and wellness legend Mark Sisson. And we've interviewed dozens of guests from just about every different health coaching program you can think of, and who practice in just about any conceivable way you can think of. But our allegiance is to the health coaching industry in its totality, first and foremost. It's our desire to continuously and unapologetically lift and promote this industry that nudged us to create this podcast for you in the first place. It's this same yearning that encouraged us to take the educational offering at our health coaching school to the next level. We are so proud to offer the Primal Health Coach Level 2 certification course, which, when combined with our primary course, the Primal Health Coach certification course, not only satisfies the educational requirements to sit for the board exam, but is specifically designed to teach advanced coaching mastery. You will work closely with a small class of peers through this 12-week, very intensive, live online classroom experience to learn how to execute a coaching relationship that is truly transformational. You'll learn and practice how to ask powerful questions, what it means to hold space for your clients, but most importantly, how to actually do it. You'll learn about the craft of motivational interviewing and the nuances of habit change, goal setting, and accountability, and how to nurture your client's own inner knowing, their intuition, and their own self-efficacy, so that they will graduate from your care a truly transformed person. You want a big, successful, powerful coaching practice. And maybe you're devouring our episodes looking for the silver bullet that's going to launch your business into the upper echelons. We've said it a million times and we'll say it again. Your coaching skills are what will make or break you and set you apart for success in this field. So if you're looking to level up your coaching skills and maybe dial up your credential and become a board-eligible health coach, look no further. You can learn more about PHCI's Level 2 program at primalhealthcoach.com/level 2. But if you would value talking to a real person about your path to being a masterful coach and perhaps a board certified coach, book some time with me personally. You can access my calendar at primalhealthcoach.com/call. Or just call me. You can reach me at 844-307-7662. Thank you for listening to Health Coach Radio, and I hope I get to talk to you soon.